welcome to a special edition of 5-5 Sports. I'm Evan Runeberg. Along with me today is Darya Amirshai, and we have a special podcast as promised at the beginning of the Premier League season. We would be back for a mid-season review, and what a half a season we have had in the Premier League. Lots of ups and downs for most clubs. There's been runs, there's been controversy, there's been COVID, there's been VAR. There's been a lot, and we're here to break down most of it. And as I like to, I don't like to often start at the top. I like to start at the bottom. So let's focus on the relegation race so far. And there's really been 5 teams that have been heavily involved: Newcastle, Leeds, Norwich, Burnley, and Watford. And it's looking like one of those 5 teams will go down. Daria, I'll start with you. If you had to say right now who your first 3 would be, I think I know at least 2 of them, but the third one's kind of tricky this year.
Yeah, I mean, you can. By the way, you can argue right now that Everton are in that race right now as well, which is, I mean, they
I
have a game
feels
in
like
hand.
everything has a quality to get out of it.
They do, but they've been
I was like
terrible this
kind
season.
of saying Southampton at the beginning of the year, and then kind of Southampton
Yeah,
had the quality. It feels like those two, it feels like the gap between the bottom 5 and the rest are that exponential, where I can't see, even though Everton are level of Leeds on points, it feels like Everton have enough to escape the other 3. If anything, Leeds would
yeah.
drop more than that. But anyways, if you want to say Everton to be relegated, I'm not gonna
No. I don't think Everton will get relegated. I think you are right. I think it's down to the bottom 5 that are there. To be honest, I think look, it is still very tight if I'm honest. But from 16th to 20th, there is only like a good 6.9, yeah, 6 point gap. Um, for sure, though, I do think Norwich is one of those that is almost a goner. Like they kind of just come up every season and they end up going down because they don't have the quality to stay up with in terms of just the general team itself. And then I mean you got Newcastle, which they recently got bought out by a new owner, which will take some time to get going. But and they haven't really had any good solid performances this season. And of course, you have Burnley, who's at the 18th, which is a team that I think both of us have predicted that are going to go down finally this year, as they've been very close to going down recently. To be honest with you, I do really think it's going to be that remaining the same the entire way through. I do think Watford are not as bad of a team as we think they are. I do think they have some issues, of course, and they could still sprout performances like they did against Manchester United a few weeks ago. So I definitely think they're fine. And I think Leeds as well. Leeds is even though they're in a really tough form, and I did predict it at the start of the season that they wouldn't be as good as last season. I think Bielsa is a good enough coach to get them out of this. I don't know if he's good. It depends, honestly. If they sack him, things get a little bit interesting. But to be honest, I think the bottom 3 will remain what it is right now. But I don't know. What do you think?
Regarding Leeds, I think you're very spot on. To your credit on Leeds, I thought maybe they would be a little bit better, but they haven't invested. They've had a lot of injuries. Look at Patrick Bamford. You lose your goal scorer. I think Leeds have been a little unlucky where Bielsa's had to include a lot of youngsters. They've been hit very heavily with COVID the last month. But I do expect Leeds to survive because they score enough goals, and sometimes it's not all about defense. Sometimes if you get enough goals, you get points. You will drop points the way Leeds play, but it comes down to them investing in further years. But you're right, as long as Leeds over the next maybe 2 or 3 months kind of distance themselves a little bit more, Leeds should be okay. I look at Watford, and I don't think Watford are going to stay up. I think their defense is just that bad. I think when you look at the way they're treating, these AFCON players, Emmanuel Dennis, he's been fantastic for them. He's honestly been the reason why, he's won them so many points. He's been involved in the goals. And they're just not letting him go, as well as Ikong, the Nigerian center back, their captain. So when you look at the way Watford kind of treating their players, and when you look at the situation around the club, defensively, they can't stop anyone. I don't think Watford have talents. Then it comes down to Newcastle, and it comes down to Norwich, and it comes down to Burnley. It comes down to which one of those 3 teams has enough. Burnley have proven time and time again they can, just scrape results out of out of thin air. Norwich do have some quality, but they just don't do consistently enough where you can see them staying up. It feels like if Newcastle have a good January, if they bring in a Trippier, maybe they get an Aubameyang. So I mean, I will back Newcastle because of the investment they are going to get, but I think going down it will be Newcastle, Norwich, and although I predicted Burnley, I think you said they would just avoid the drop. I think Burnley will. I'm going to change. I think Burnley now just avoid the drop.
We're
I will
switching.
go with Norwich. Watford, and no, sorry, I will put Burnley in there. I think they do go down, and Newcastle are the
Oh,
ones that stay up. But no, it will be a tough relegation battle. It will definitely be something to keep an eye on, as it's hard to see either of the five teams really. Maybe one of them, maybe a Leeds or Newcastle, depending on January, they do go on a run and they distance themselves. But we know that it will be definitely four teams in and around it going into the final month. And sometimes a relegation race is more exciting than the title race, which may happen this year. But let's focus on a different race, the top four race. And there are a solid four teams that are fighting for fourth place. You have United in there, you have Spurs, you have Arsenal, and you have West Ham. And they've definitely had different seasons, all of them, for different reasons. One's had a change of manager, some have had inconsistencies with form, but the four teams involved are the four I mentioned above. Darya, how do you see this top four race panning out?
well, it's going to go down the wire for sure. Unless, like, of course, Liverpool or obviously Chelsea drop off, which I don't really think that'll happen. It's going to go down to that one spot. And you have a team such as Arsenal, which is currently on a resurgence at the moment, even with their loss against Manchester City recently. They are looking like a different team altogether. And that has to do with Arteta dropping Aubameyang and kind of revitalizing the team in general. We have to see if that's consistent, but that's always the case. And of course you have West Ham, which has been a very solid this season. David Moyes has done a really good job with this team and having just a general good attacking threat, but also defensively have been very well solid, especially at home. And of course, you got Tottenham and United, which of course are kind of in similar places in a way where they have their managerial issues. They have teams that are kind of broken in a lot of aspects and that need major retooling. In terms of who do I think will actually make it? I mean, look, I could straight up tell you, you know what? Yeah, United's gonna make it. Manchester United's gonna make it. I don't think West Ham, Tottenham, Arsenal are not gonna drop off. And look, I want to say that, but here's the realistic situation here. With United being in Europe and with the Champions League coming up, and there's a lot of issues around the club that have still yet to be fixed. I don't really think so far. If you ask me, do they deserve to make the top four? I don't really think they do. I think they've been abysmal all season. And if I'm honest with you, out of the four teams there, I really do think that's between West Ham and Arsenal that kind of deserve that fourth spot. Now, of course, the Premier League is not about deserving; it's about getting the results. So easily, Tottenham and United can spring up if they keep their shit together. And you know what? It's possible, but right now, if I were to look likely, I think the top four is once again going to be very similar to this, and it's going to keep it as Arsenal in that fourth place because they have simply been very impressive this season. Even when at times we thought they weren't going to be, we thought they're going to be crumble, and Arteta's reign in management was going to be over. So yeah, I do think Arsenal will make it. And I don't think United will make the top four this season, unfortunately, because they simply have not been good enough, and I don't think Tottenham are anywhere near either of the teams as well. So well, we have to see. But it's unfortunate I can't even say my own team to make the top four this season.
Yeah, I mean, it's not looking likely. And you compare the other four. I'll start with West Ham. And West Ham, we have to credit David Moyes because he has a squad where he understands their capabilities. He understands, how to get the best out of them. And that's exactly what he's doing. They've recruited very well. David Moyes isn't trying to be something he's not. He's, got players to fit his system. He has, Declan Rice. He has some, Fellaini now and Suchek. He has a great back four, and Zuma may be injured now, but they have Dawson, who's been very consistent. Agbana goes out injured, but then you can bring in Diop. So they've recruited well, and they have the depth at least at center back to be able to replace the injuries that they've had. And then at fullback, Kufal last year I thought was one of their players of the season, if not for Declan Rice. And because of injuries, he's kind of had to take a back seat to I think it's Ben Johnson, the fullback, and then you have Aaron Cresswell as well. So they're just a very balanced team. Antonio up top's been banging goals. Very physical striker. We know what he's been about. And then you have guys like Bowen, Saeed Benrahma on one side. You bring in Lanzini, Fornals. they have depth, they have quality, and David Moyes is definitely getting a tune out of them. But I feel like with West Ham, they've been doing it for 2.5 years now. So I think the league may start to figure out the more inconsistencies. And because the players aren't as good as maybe, the players on Arsenal or the players at Spurs, especially when you think about quality and when you think of, pedigree, you look at Spurs, Harry Kane, the son, where you're getting. Sometimes, if you have an injury or two, you may not, get the same consistency over a full 38 game season for West Ham. I think the Europa League is also going to damage their season a little bit, being in the round of 32. If they, advance 2 or 3 rounds, the game's going to pile up. If injuries pile up, that's just my worry on West Ham. But they've done nothing to really, deserve my kind of skepticism. But because of West Ham, or because of the situation they're in, because they don't have the same kind of money and the same kind of backing to maybe get out of a situation where, if they suffer an injury or two, it may just be a little too much for West Ham. And you're looking at 3 other quality teams. Just on United, it's been disappointing because it seems more of an everything issue rather than one issue that you kind of focus on, and that's where you start from. It seems like you almost have to scrap everything at United, and there are quality players. You look at Bruno Fernandes, who's off form. You look at Rashford, who I'm a big fan of. He's getting a lot of stick right now. To me, the Rashford stick's unnecessary because some games he won't play well, but it's just like the nature of the risk reward game that he has, and he's also not being put in the positions to excel. So all this Rashford criticism, sometimes it's down to coaching rather than it is the player. You have players like Ronaldo, Cavani. These are all class players, but they're not taking because of the midfield at United. The midfield's dreadful. They've won the midfield battle maybe 3 times all year. And this obsession with Scott McTominay, I mean, he's been the consistent. You look at all the inconsistencies that United have had. I mean, Scott McTominay, pardon me, has been the consistent. And he's maybe had one world-class game, but that was against Burnley, and Burnley were pretty crap, a week and a half ago. So you look at United, you look at the personnel, and you look at where the consistencies are and the inconsistencies. It really tells you a lot about what's going on at the squad right now. The recruitment hasn't been good enough, especially at the back for a few years now. Harry Maguire isn't good enough. Wan-Bissaka isn't good enough when you compare him to Reece James, when you compare him to Cancelo, when you compare him to Trent. You look at the right back conversation, and he was in it maybe the last 2 years, but clearly his inconsistencies have shown on the offensive side of the ball. Defensively, I think he's a great tackler, but United, a team that has to be progressive in 2021, a big club, Wan-Bissaka isn't going to be good enough for that club. So it comes down to can Ragnick get a tune out of them? Can he find a system that works? Because the system that he's playing, the system he's used to, isn't working for the United players. It's clear he's had maybe 5 games. It's just not working. And I know as a United fan, you must be frustrated, to the moon, because you expect better performances. You expect players to be playing for the badge. And the second you see them walk out onto the pitch, you see, facial expressions is often a very kind of easy way to kind of spot how performance is going to go. And I know you're watching the game yesterday against Wolves. The heads just weren't there for United. Clearly, you could see they weren't, into the game whatsoever.
There's a lot of issues, as you mentioned, with Manchester United this season. I mean, you go through a lot of managerial changes inside the clubhouse, and a lot of issues going around within the backroom staff. There's been a lot of issues. There's no doubt about it. And I think I said early on in the season, I was like, we need a central defensive midfielder, and that was one of the issues going in. I was very confident that
every United fan knew it. You go on Twitter, every United fan that has a pulse and that has an understanding of football realized after watching the last 2 years and watching McFred and Matic, an aging Matic, realized you needed a CDM.
And you know what? It's funny how we realized it, but the backroom staff did it, and whether that was because of funds or whatever is. Anyways, that's a separate story. My thing is, though, when I was watching yesterday, I remember I was looking at the lineup, and I was looking at the average of players that are on that squad. And I saw the fact that our 2 leading men are 2 36-year-olds in Ronaldo and Cavani. Now, don't get me wrong, they are world class on their day. They have, they've had a lot of success in world football. But this kind of tells a story of, I don't know if Ragnick knows what his best lineup is yet in 5 games. Now, he's not supposed to fully. There's supposed to be some changes, I feel. But I think besides a good half against Palace in the first game of his, tenure, there hasn't been much of an improvement. And this is one of those things where I blame more the players than the manager at the moment, because I think it was really easy to scapegoat Ole, and I always will say that even with his time and United being cut
You're
short,
completely right. You're completely right about that.
he was a scapegoat, and I feel for him, but it was right for him to go. He just wasn't going to move forward. I don't think Ragnick though has gone even to the players yet. I mean, you're hearing reports that are going on within the club, and you just wonder what is going on, what kind of shit show is really going on with this team. And the fact that they come out on the pitch against Wolves and give a performance that was arguably one of the worst this season, and this is with a different manager, says a lot about the state that the club is in. And you have players like Ronaldo, which he's a world-class player, and he's done so much for club and country. And you just wonder, what is he going to do long-term for this club? There's a lot of long-term issues, which I think worries a lot of fans like myself. And it's like, I'm like, we have a cup game, I believe, an FA Cup game against Villa next Monday, and I'm talking to a bunch of United fans, and a lot of us are not excited for that game because we know what we're getting now. We know the performances, we know the standard that the club is kind of meeting at, and it's kind of almost an expectation that we're going to come out playing terrible football. And when we play decent, it's almost like this revolutionary idea. It's like, wow, you can actually string a few passes together. It's quite embarrassing, to be honest. And the sucky thing about it is that I don't know where we go from this. It's really annoying. You saw the situation with Pogba that has not been resolved. You have the issues with Maguire and this defensive partnership. And you had Phil Jones and Varane, out of all people, starting in center back yesterday, when you have an 80 million player in Maguire, who I know is obviously suspended, but you have you're resorting to a center back like that. It just shows the quality difference. And you did mention with McTominay, of course Ragnick has been sticking with Matic and McTominay and Fred as his midfield options. Look, Pogba's great. He's a player that he's a difference maker. I'm not going to pretend he isn't. You can't have those three as a partnership long term. It just doesn't work. McTominay is a good squad player at the most. He's not a starting player for this team. There's just so many issues going on when it comes to age gap and when it comes to form. Everything going against United this season, really, if I'm honest with you. And to be honest, they've been shooting themselves in their own foot. And it's sad to see. It really is. And I don't know where they go from this.
You said a lot right there. And I want to break down a little before I finish the top four race. The reason we're focusing a little bit more on United's West Ham, I believe they're going to finish 7-8, and I believe it's going to, or 6-7. And then I believe Arsenal Spurs are going to be battling for 4-5. That's why I focus on those two first. But it's on United because we do have to focus on them. Yeah, it feels like they have so many problems that can be solved, but because of the United board, they don't. I feel like a lot of the American board that focuses a lot more on the marketing side of the game really doesn't see the problems with United. They really don't understand the problems on the pitch, and they don't really understand that you can't win a game if you lose a midfield battle constantly. And Ronaldo could save you, only so many times, but Ronaldo's exposed a lot of what's wrong at the club: mentality, tactics, kind of system. If you put Ronaldo in a good system, he would score 30 goals. You put him with, Pep Guardiola, he would be at 30 goals, be the league's leading scorer. He'd be loving life. But you look at the system that's being, deployed at United right now, and you look at the mentality and you look at the defending that's been going on at that club this entire season. It's been shambolic. It's been a complete joke. And when you get played off the park by Wolves, and let's not kid ourselves, Wolves deserve to win that game. They were the better team. And when you go up against teams like Brighton and teams that are well coached, you could think of, an Arsenal who maybe I should have lost to. A lot of it's being individual quality for the last, few years from United. And this isn't a dig on Ollie. We knew he wasn't good enough for years. We knew he wasn't a tactically great coach. He was good for the current United core because, he's very, relaxed. He wouldn't overwork them. They were able to play on the counter. You'd have maybe Fred and McTominay doing some of the dirty work, and then you'd have your defense playing a little bit deeper, and then you'd get a few counterattack goals, and it would work. And even after a loss, you'd come back. You'd win versus a mid-table club. You'd win, maybe a Big Six game, you'd beat a City, and then all would be forgotten with Ollie. So was he scapegoated? Yes, because a lot of the problems weren't his fault, and he was dealing with a lot of things that he shouldn't have been dealing with. It. You mentioned the Pogba situation. Sirius club doesn't let Pogba run the club. And, we'll talk about Chelsea and the Lukaku situation a little later in the show, but I mean, Pogba, it seems like he has all the power. He could show up when he wants. He could play when he wants. He can train when he wants. If he wants to go to Dubai, he could go to Dubai when he wants. If he wants to fly to Miami and go to have a Miami party, he can do that when he wants. There seems to be no discipline at United. And discipline in a team, especially in soccer, you need to be disciplined because you're playing 3 times a week, especially at the top clubs like United, Chelsea, City. You're playing in multiple competitions. You're playing in the Champions League. You're playing at the highest level. And you need to maintain top fitness. You need to maintain top shape. And these United players just don't seem to be taken seriously enough. The report I saw, they were complaining because they had to drive home in the dark. I mean, that's just about as pathetic as it gets. So when you want to look at the problems at United, that's where the problems lie. It's a mentality problem. The board doesn't have any control over the team. And there are things that can be fixed at the club. And there are things that can make United be a top 4 club again. But the reality is teams like Spurs and Arsenal, and say a West Ham who haven't been good for years or been very inconsistent, and they've been kind of on the United trail that United's on right now. We said for years, they're okay, under Arsenal top 4, they had Wenger. It wasn't all bad, but we understood that Wenger was, masking a lot of the problems. And I think Ollie, and, we made fun of Ollie a lot, but credit to him, he kept that team afloat for years. And now we're starting to realize where the problems lie. We're starting to understand what needs to be fixed at United. When will it be fixed and how quickly can they recover this form? Look, we saw AC Milan struggle for 10 years, the Kings of Italy for years. Arsenal had a massive fall. They're starting to get back to it with, good scouting. They've, had a good transfer window and they're starting to put together a young core and they at least have an idea. They have a philosophy. Right now, United have no philosophy. The players just look dead. They look unmotivated. And I mean, the reality is you were played off the park by Wolves. Ruben Neves and João Moutinho ran the show against United. Scott McTominay couldn't touch Ruben Neves. Ruben Neves was the best player on that pitch yesterday. He was brilliant. And when you're letting guys like Padence this week and Adama, and last week who did you play last week? Remind me.
Burnley, Newcastle.
Yeah, Newcastle. And I'm watching, Saint-Maximin and Joelinton nutmeg your defenders. Like, it has to be humiliating, but it seems like the players aren't humiliated. It looks like they're there to cash a check. And as a United fan, I'm a Chelsea fan, and I have my own issues right now. But as a United fan, as one of like the millions around the world, you must be in shock watching, comparing this team from 5 years ago, a team you love, just to see what happened or what's happened to the mentality and what's happened to the structure, the backbone of that team.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny you bring up the one reveal about them going home
training after dark.
Training after dark. It's something that if I was even in house league, I was like, no, I want to play, man. I want to play at night. Like even for us in our little, it's like a little league over here. I don't know what's going on over at Old Trafford or at Carrington, I should say. But no, of course, it's ultimately papering over the cracks. It's been that way for a while, and it's just how United have been run for a while. And I think Arsenal are starting to learn, they do that for so long with who they have. And I think United are going to go through this transitional period once again where they have to go and figure out what type of system they want to play. And look, he's an interim coach, so he is a benefit of him being an interim coach is that Ragnick, is that you don't need to worry about, okay, is he going to be gone? Because he's going to be gone. He's going to be gone most likely as at least by, May or
Summer,
June
in
the summer. And that's great because now you get to expose the issues within the club. As you mentioned, there's not only like issues where there's certain players that shouldn't be in the team, but also players that are like dead wood that don't that also are on the bench. There's also looking at a different tactical style about who can play in that system and who can't, which I think is actually a great thing to have. I think that United's situation is they're going to have to go through a really, really rough patch. It's not going to get better until next season. I really don't think it's going to get better this season at all. I think it's going to get worse. Mm-hmm. The only hope I have personally is for the cup competitions. In the Champions League, I think United are a good one-game team. They're not really one-off team, but they're not a consistent team, and that's proven why they are not in the top four race, the premiership race or the for the title. Never mind the top four race. So yeah, we'll have to see. Obviously, we have to see, but not impressive so far. I'm hoping for changes, but I don't expect them right now.
For sure. And let's talk about the teams that are on the up, Spurs and Arsenal. Spurs, kind of played United, and that was the last kind of Ollie, big game where he won over Spurs. But that kind of set things in motion for Spurs to rectify their early mistake in hiring Nuno Espirito Santo, bringing Antonio Conte, who was rumored to be joining Man United. But Spurs made the convincing pitch, and they've been brilliant since he's come in. He's doing what Antonio Conte does.
Yeah, it's they're impressive, Tottenham, or they're not impressive, I should say. They're definitely, they're going through a similar period as United in the sense where they don't know that there's not a lot on the managers he can do. Like he can do only so much. Antonio Conte is one of those coaches that likes to start a season with the transfer window and go out throughout. Whereas this is the first time in a long time he's going in mid-season like this, or somewhat mid-season. So ultimately, it's about finding out which players are going to be good for him in the long term, and which players like there's been players like in AA, which has been in the frings for years about with different coaches. Is he going to be a starter for this Tottenham team? And you of course have players like Kane and Son, which you got to determine where are they going to be in the mix. Is Kane going to leave into a club such as Chelsea or or City, or are you going to have Son, who's going to be a long-term player for the side? I think there's a lot of those question marks like United, and I think it's something they do need to discover throughout the season, and they're showing it. They're in the top four race for sure, but of course there's a lot of competition for it, so we need to see how it goes.
Yeah, I'll talk about Arsenal in a minute, but just to focus on Spurs for a minute, I think they will finish top four, and simply because look, I saw what Antonio Conte did for Chelsea. When he came in after they finished 10th. For them to finish first. And, I'll quickly say United missed an opportunity, because if you think he couldn't have made a back three of Harry Maguire, Varane, and Lindelof for Bailly, that would have given Bailly more minutes. It would have given maybe another, center back more minutes. You see how he's using either Oliver Skip or Harry Winks beside a guy like Højbjerg. I think United could have done that if they wanted to stick a Fred or McTominay beside a Van de Beek. Instead, now Van de Beek's going to leave in the summer. Instead, he probably would have had a very good chance under Conte to be kind of that creative midfielder, play that role that Fabregas maybe played for Chelsea. And, we've seen many players for Conte, in Italy and Inter Milan. He had, Brozovic and then an Eriksen, or he didn't really play Eriksen, but he had, his creative player, and then he had his holding player, which he had it for Chelsea, he had for Inter, he's had for, he had for Juventus. We know what Antonio Conte is about. But, you could have had Ronaldo up top, with a Rashford and a Greenwood on either side, or a Rashford and a Sancho. And then, fullback, Tellez, Shaw, you have enough fullback options. So I think United missed a huge opportunity with Conte, because Conte is a serial winner. He comes in and wins, and maybe he wouldn't have fit the United style. Maybe, he wouldn't have lasted forever. But that was a signing. If you look at the way Spurs are playing, Harry Kane seems back in form. He seems motivated. Son's a world-class player. Anyone that tells me otherwise just doesn't understand the game. Just his quickness, his ability on the ball. In one-on-one situations, he can go left, he can go right. He has the curl, he has the whip. Son, brilliant player, and he may be a bit of a cheeky prick sometimes, but young Son, brilliant player. And we could talk about where the weakness lies for Spurs maybe, and we could talk about fullback, and people target Emerson Royale, who's maybe struggled. He doesn't have the best crossing ability, but let's be honest, he won the league with Victor Moses at fullback and Marcos Alonso, so that's not say, like, as long as you're fit, as long as you can run back and forth, and as long as you fulfill your defensive capabilities, Antonio Conte could stick Murillo wing back, and as long as we have the dedication, as long as we have the commitment to his system and his style of play, he wins. So that's why I think, not necessarily personnel. I think they have I don't think they have better personnel than Arsenal. I just think I have to back Antonio Conte, because I've seen what he's done already in a short time at Spurs, and I've seen what he has done in Italy, winning the league with Inter Milan, winning the league with Chelsea. He wins everywhere, and there may be a falling out afterwards, but in the short term, brilliant for Daniel Levy and Spurs to bring him in. On Arsenal, they've also been brilliant, and it's been led by the young core. Saka is by far their best player. I don't care what anyone says. He's world class. I think he's better than, everyone was comparing all the young players, Greenwood, Hudson-Odoi, They had people are comparing him to Foden. I think Saka and Foden are pretty even, but they're very different players. Saka is more like the speed, the cutting edge. Foden's a little bit more of that, quality, the technical player. But I think Saka is brilliant, and Smith Rowe is being fantastic for them. And ever since they dropped Aubameyang, they're united. They have a team spirit defensively at the back. And Ramsdale has them all motivated. He has all the fans jumping up and down, and he may not, he may make some camera saves, but then he's not letting in any bad goals. So, I mean, we can kind of make fun of the way Ramsdale, makes some saves, but in the day, he's playing for Arsenal. He's acting a little bit of acting a little bit like an entertainer. And at the end of the day, Ben White and Gabriel being fantastic. Gabriel especially settled in last year from Lille. He's been flawless this year. So all the credit to him. And the fullbacks are holding their own. And Tomiyasu, who's come in, I didn't think he would be as good as he is, but he really hasn't put a foot wrong. And then Tierney and Nuno, they've been good on the other side. They've been good on the left. Whoever plays, that position requires a lot of running for Arteta, and we see he's been rotating them. But in the summer, they knew he knew what he wanted. He invested in areas which made sense for him. Ramsdale, we all thought 30 million would be a waste, but he's been brilliant. Probably the signing of the summer. Tomiyasu's come in, both feet. He's been excellent. He's, been helping a lot of offensive moves, compared to a guy like Cedric or Bellerin, who's very one-footed, doesn't get the ball out as quickly. So, I mean, he's scouted well, and, we all made fun of Arteta because maybe he was a little, young, but clearly Pep saw something in him because Pep doesn't bring in, dummies as assistants. He definitely wants, top quality managers and top quality ideas. So I think it's just, a big club. Maybe it took some time to settle in. I think Arsenal will have their road bumps, which is why they'll maybe finish 5th or 6th. A young team, sometimes, things happen, but currently they're playing fantastic. And I think they'll finish 5th just because I don't see, the experience and, in a long season as things, tend to get later on, nerves start to come on. We've all seen it before. So right now they're playing well, but it's mid-season. I just think later on Arsenal will have that dip. But going into the future, at least now this young core is getting that mentality and they're getting that understanding of what it means to play for Arsenal, what it means to play for a big team, and what it means to win in moments that matter the most. Against City, they were very unlucky with a few of the calls. They deserved a penalty. The penalty against them was fair. The red card against them was fair. But I think it was Stuart Atwell was the referee. It was either him or Paul Tierney. He was very biased and he was getting a lot of things wrong. I think Rodri get away with just about everything, but he was booking Saka for maybe, I don't know. The ref wasn't good. But that's also a problem with VAR and the consistency that, VAR has shown this season. We'll talk about that briefly in a couple minutes, but overall, I think the top 4 race will come down to Arsenal and Spurs, and I think Spurs have the edge because of Antonio Conte and the world-class players they have up top in Kane and Son, supplemented maybe by a Lucas.
Honestly, I think the only difference between you and I is the fact that there's a dip that I don't think personally Arsenal are going to dip again. However, I hope kind of they do for the sake of United's. But I don't think they're going to dip. I think that Arsenal finally kind of started to find their footing. They still have a mentality issue when it comes to, holding on to lead. I mean, the way they play against City, ultimately they should have won. If I'm honest, they should have won that game. It was due to their own mistakes. Again, shooting themselves in their own foot here, where they could have come out of a win from that. Definitely Arteta's team was the better team on the day. And that I think anybody was watching the game can admit to. And, of course, Arsenal is in a state where they're lucky. They don't really have this expectation with this team anymore. I mean, when Arsene Wenger was still in charge, there was this mentality or this idea that, they're a top 4 team. They got to make the top 4. And then as soon as they did it, and as soon as they did, they're not even in the Europa League at times. Now nobody really has that clear definition, which is a great thing for if you're a manager for the club, because they can, the roof is as high as they want to set it at the very moment.
And my favorite expression, the ceiling is the roof.
The ceiling is, yeah. And it's good for them in the long run. Obviously it won't always be like this. I think this season, if they make the top 4, it's going to be humongous success for them going forward. If they, I personally still edge them over Tottenham, only because I think Arteta has found his footing. I think Tottenham are going to be in that race with it. Again, this is a really tight. It's going to be a tight race regardless with those 4 teams. And you can even argue that at one point maybe Wolves can get involved as well as the 8th team. I don't know if they will, but who knows? After beating United like that, last night, anything can happen at this point. It's a Barclays Premier League. Anything can really happen. So, but if I'm being honest, I still think Arsenal will edge it as a top four, and Tottenham and United hopefully will come close to it, and West Ham.
Yeah, it's definitely gonna be race, and they're all within it. Yeah, you mentioned Wolves. I just don't think they score enough to be put in their race. Maybe actually Brian. I think Brian played great football. If they just converted a few more of their chances, I think Graham Potter, honestly, if not for Pep Guardiola, would be the coach of the year in the Barclays Premier League. But let's focus a little bit on VAR. And we talked about it a lot last year and the inconsistencies in the show, it showed. And I think despite it being better this year, I think we've seen a lot of those inconsistencies creep in, especially over the last few months. What would you make of VAR, and how do you kind of assess the way the referees are using it in England?
Well, like I think when we were watching the European Championships back in the summer of 2021, there was definitely an idea where I think both of us were looking at each other and like, this is how VAR should be treated. For the most part, I think VAR was very successful during the European Championships, with the odd mistake here and there. But that's you can't ever, soccer or football is a game about mistakes. That's the whole thing. And even refereeing. I've always said this from the start. I think VAR is a fantastic invention for the league, and I think it's in generally a good thing. But I think the problems come from the people who are managing VAR, are the ones that are actually in as the video assistants. And that was something of an issue before VAR, where referees weren't in the Premier League are not fantastic. There are very few that you can say that are solid. And in my opinion, Michael Oliver is, in my opinion, the best ref in the Premier League and one of the best in the world, in my personal opinion.
Yeah, no doubt.
And I think it comes down to the video assistant referees not knowing how to use their own technology yet. I think this is still becoming an issue. And the thing is, I think a lot of Premier League fans, when they watch the European Championship, were very confused when they saw these actual calls being made that weren't usually made, calls that would usually be made in England that aren't made here, because a lot of them were a lot softer in England. And that's a different. I believe Serie A and Bundesliga has not really had this issue, or the Spanish league. Of course, MLS is very similar in a sense with Premier League, where the refs are not particularly great all the time. But there's a type of officiating issue in the general Premier League and just in England in general, and I think that's what VAR gets the most scrutiny for, is that simply the people that are using this technology don't know how to actually use it properly and are discussing and analyzing the wrong things. Now, has it been better this season? Absolutely. I think VAR will continuously get better. I just don't think it's going to be for a while, till we're like really, in a set norm of what it is. But that being said, it's an interesting topic that I think will go on for years. And I think long run, I think it'll be a good thing. But right now, it's still going to struggle, and there's a lot of issues with it.
Yeah, I have a few points when you said. Just correct me if I'm wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, VAR has been inconsistent in a lot of areas where it should have been. And I think bias plays a big part in it. There's an English bias. I think there's a Liverpool bias, City bias. I think last year, especially more than maybe this year, there's the United bias. Yeah. And I think the teams have been screwed a lot. And I mean, I will say Chelsea, but I think they've got or VAR chooses to not look at a lot of things that go on in Chelsea for whatever reason, as well as Arsenal. I think Spurs have been hurt by VAR as well. And I think the mid-season or mid-table clubs, what usually happens is VAR gets involved when they want to keep it a close game. If it's a 2-0 game, they want to give a penalty to make it 2-1, so they give a soft penalty. But it's just the inconsistencies that have been creeping in with penalties, with handballs. I think they use their own rules at times. And, people will say, well, sometimes accurate, it's not a perfect science. I'm like, there just has to be consistency, and there has to be a rule book, and they have to follow the rule book. And sometimes, it'll be close, sometimes not. But just going back to this weekend, and the big controversy in the Chelsea game was the Mane elbow. Is it a red card? Isn't it a red card? I honestly, even as a Chelsea fan, I can understand if it was a red card, but I can understand why it's a yellow. And that's when VAR is used correctly. But when they're spending 2 minutes to look at the Kovacic goal, it's like, what are you doing? It's like, I feel like VAR is being implemented at the wrong times, and it's being implemented only for certain teams, if that makes any sense. And they look at certain issues, and they go on in the game, And that's what bothers me about VAR. It's still very inconsistent. And we're looking for consistency. And you could be wrong a few times as long as you're consistent with, the way you're calling it, the way, you know, the way you want to analyze the game. If you are, from a technological standpoint, if you're looking at certain issues and determining what the parameters are for, a goal, for what isn't a goal. But when you're getting these inconsistencies, when you're taking these long pauses, and then when you take a minute to look at it and then you call the ref over, what the Premier League has to get in the habit of doing, if it's a 50-50, call the ref over, show him all the angles, show him the slow-mo, show him the screenshots that matter, right? Sometimes you can't, look from a screenshot, but, look at the Arsenal City penalty, the one where Ederson trips up Udegaard. It's a penalty, and
Yeah.
they have every tool in the book to bring I keep forgetting if it was Atwell or if it was the other bloke that was reffing the City Arsenal game. 1 second in, you see one replay, it's 50-50. Call him over to the board. Don't waste a minute and a half and then, call him over and give him one screenshot to look at. They did that for Anthony Taylor in against the first game at Anfield, Liverpool Chelsea. I remember the Reece James handball, where it's never a handball, where it's never we call it double jeopardy now, where you can't give a penalty and a red card. They show a screenshot, but the ball hit his knee and then his hand, and they don't show Anthony Taylor that view. And clearly he didn't see that view on first replay. So he's under the assumption to give Reece James a red card. It changes the game, and that's where the bias comes in, and that's what bothers me. There's still a bias in VAR. There's still inconsistencies that they haven't ironed out, and despite it being better and slightly, more tolerable with, the offsides, or giving it less, or they're looking at it less often, the minimal 1 millimeter that they gave, 15 or 20 times last year, which drove every Premier League fan absolutely nuts. So I think they got better with it this year, but it's still not good enough for the quality, for the money that's being invested in the Premier League, and for the fans that week in, week out support their team. It's still, there's still an unjust system that is going on with VAR, and they have to fix that in order for it to become more consistent for the upcoming seasons.
I will say, just to touch on this, is like I've always thought of VAR as a lot of opinions being put into one room.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in like, if you really think about theoretically, it's not a terrible thing. But the problem is football is a very subjective game, and you're trying to put objective facts as to what is a right call and what is not. But the thing is that someone will view a studs challenge very differently than another person, and that's just even between us. We we've had our practices.
Sorry, that's where the consistency comes in, because we saw a couple of weeks ago the Harry Kane incident against Liverpool, and then we compare it to the Paul Pogba incident against Spurs a few months ago. Two very similar challenges. Yes. One gets sent off, one gets yellow, and that's where I think English bias comes in. I think, yes, because one's Paul Pogba and one's, a diva, and one's kind of, an outcast, when it comes to, the way that England views, the way their players should behave. And, they have a certain standard of how maybe they interpret, their athletes, should portray themselves on the field and off the field. And Paul Pogba maybe doesn't fit that same kind of narrative that Harry Kane does.
Yeah. And that's the thing. England is a generally very physical game, the Premiership. Mm-hmm. And because of that, when you have opinions of so many different types, I mean, you and I have had multiple conversations about different calls where we view it a different way. Just imagine when you have 4 other people in a room watching those same angles. And the thing is, they have the proof right there to decide. You have different opinions going at once. And look, I'm not going to pretend I know anything that's going on in the VAR room, because, we don't know. I mean, we have our practices with reffing and, personally in our own stuff, and it's very minimal. But when it comes to just a professional stuff, when you see the way referees are dealing with these situations, there isn't a consistency. There is this problem about what subjectiveness about what is right and what is wrong. Yeah. And that's the problem of football in general. It's not an objective game. There's different, you can't, the rules are objectively stated, but nobody knows which ones are actually set for each call. And it becomes very confusing for a lot of refs. And I do feel for them to an extent, but I also do think that there are some clear issues that that VAR has to fix and
Yeah.
going forward.
And I believe if they just become consistent with, certain rules, I think the problem is we see, two similar challenges, from one week to another week, and they call differently. And that's where the arguments come in. That's where the frustration from a fan comes in, because, even if we disagree with what a call is, if they're consistent with that call, we can all live with it, because we understand that's how they're calling it. That's what the rule is, and that's their interpretation of, a certain challenge or a certain, law, like, maybe the handball law. But we see, we've seen very often, especially this season, two similar kind of challenges or two similar plays, and they call it differently because maybe one plays for United and one plays for Everton. And that's where the frustration comes in. As long as we get consistency as Premier League fans, we can accept it. But the problem is they've been so inconsistent with their own rules and with the same rules, then it becomes confusing for all the fans. Moving on to something else that was very confusing, Romelu Lukaku, with a very strange interview after the United match 3 weeks ago. There's a lot to go through in that interview, but to really summarize, a lot of it was, saying how much he loved Inter Milan, saying he wishes he never left. If they're offered, or if he was offered a contract, he would have stayed. And he, talking about he didn't like how the situation unfolded. But then there are a lot of comments where maybe it was lost in translation, but from my interpretation, it was just very stupid from Lukaku, talking about, his frustrations with Tuchel, they disagree on the system, he hasn't, enjoyed his time in London so far. And then saying other stuff like, he imagined, he'd be at a big club like Bayern or Real Madrid or Barcelona, not including Chelsea in that, which is strange. They just won the Champions League. You just came into that club. So, overall, there are a lot of comments that were very damaging to Lukaku, more so than anyone else or anything else, if that makes any sense, regarding Chelsea or Inter Milan or, Tuchel. So where do you stand on those comments? Because obviously I have a different perspective as, a Chelsea fan, but, what do you make of those comments, and especially the timing of the comments after, let's say, when it came out, but let's say the comments were made after the United match.
I find it funny. It honestly reminded me instantly when I heard the reports about what happened with Pogba a few years ago when after just before Peg game, and his agent came out and said that he didn't want to stay here and riled things up. It's really weird. Lukaku has, I've had my doubts over him as a player, even in Italy, and even when he started out and when he came back to Chelsea. And he's obviously a very solid player. And his time in United, I always thought he was a solid player, and I still believe that. These comments, nonetheless, were very stupid of him to make. There's no like doubt about it. And as someone who's like basically a neutral in this case, I'm kind of looking and wondering, why would he make it at this stage in the season? And I try to think that he had good intentions by doing this interview with with the Guardian. I think it was a Guardian or whatever. So I don't think he did this out of spite, and I still will be on that because I feel like Tuchel would not have played him in games, and he wouldn't have after like that was 3 weeks ago, and this just came out at a wrong time. I'll say this: if Chelsea are winning their games, and which they haven't been doing as comfortably recently, these comments are a lot less, negative to the club. And don't get me wrong, they are negative regardless. But I think it's because of the frustration of where they are at in the season, and they're slowly dropping off from that whole winning the title right now. But anything can still happen with that. Going forward, I think him being dropped for this Liverpool game, I saw people panicking about that and saying, this is his time over, it's done. I actually think that was a very smart move by Tuchel, to be honest with you. And I do genuinely believe that I think Lukaku will be back into this team, and I think he's going to stay. I don't think he's leaving. Yeah,
they've already announced he's not going anywhere.
There you go. And you know what? I think anybody who thinks he's going to go because of something like this, I feel like it's just being a little bit irrational, if I'm honest with you. He made some stupid comments, but it did not mean he's done. He's a professional football player. And he needs to continue the scene. He's getting paid to play. He's paid to score goals. And he's finally before Liverpool game, he was getting in form, and he might still be. So going
Yeah.
forward, I honestly think this will drop off. I think a lot of people when it initially came out really jumped the gun about what it is, and I don't blame anybody who did, especially Chelsea fans. I don't blame them, and because even myself, I was too. I think a lot of people jumped the gun to what actually happened and didn't really realize the context of what the interview was about. So going forward, I don't think it'll be an issue. I think it's gonna be put on the rug very very slowly as we go forward to this season. But that's just me personally.
A simple way to kind of analyze what Lukaku said, I think, looking at it from as unbiased view as possible, it was more kind of a message to Inter Milan fans. They never really had that chance.
Yes.
They did revive his career, to a large extent, the way, he kind of came into the league. He was a big bully. He was basically like the Goliath of the league. Just his size, his talent, his prowess. And we know the Italian league is not the same standard of the Premier League. And I think some of it was lost in translation, but the wording he chose was just incredibly stupid. Incredibly, talking about when he was talking about Lautaro Martinez, saying, no, he should stay, I'll join him in Milan soon. It's just like the way he was talking about Milan, I want to join very soon. I don't want to join them in career. I want to, join, while I'm still at my top level. It's like you just joined Chelsea. And I mean, I know you've had injuries. You just came back from COVID. Maybe you thought you deserved to start against United, but I mean, you hadn't played like in 2 months. So it was very confusing from I'd say his point of view to be, putting that out in the media, considering the fact that he really hasn't been available for Tuchel. And I mean, I'll talk about Tuchel in a second because everything he said, the way he handles the media, the way he handles basically England, like he's brilliant. I don't know if you ever listen to him speak, if you watch his press conference at all. I never used to watch manager press conferences. Like I'd watch, Lampard's. I got in the habit of watching, his on YouTube after, or if they would play a big game, just because he bled Chelsea. It just having him back felt good. So like you'd watch some of his press conferences. I'm sure you would watch like some Ollie press conferences. But with Tuchel, like I refuse to miss him. Like I refuse to miss what he says because he's just so well spoken. He's brilliant. He's cheeky with his answers. And the way he's handled the situation, saying, I was very surprised because, in training, he gives his all. He's being a fantastic, player in training. We want him at the club. We want him to succeed. But he said he was put in a very difficult position, and to drop him was absolutely the right decision. I don't care what anyone says. It's more important to make a statement against Liverpool. Losing the 2 points was more important to eliminate player power, and that's the difference. We mentioned Paul Pogba earlier, and I think that's as direct comparison as we could get over the last maybe few years. The way Pogba handles himself and the way he conducts himself, the way Lukaku tried to conduct himself, and we remember when Raiola, his agent, put out before a huge Champions League match when you guys lost to Leipzig, and they seemed to brush under the rug. And he came off in that game he came off the bench in I think the 60th minutes against Leipzig, and they still lost. And it's because it was desperation, and because Ollie doesn't have that same kind of respect that I think Tuchel has for himself and for his club. And we saw the fight that the Chelsea players put out against Liverpool. Everyone was brilliant. Everyone ran their socks off. Everyone, clearly they're playing for Tuchel. So Lukaku's comments, they just become more confusing because I don't know if he thought the players would turn on Tuchel the way, in previous, players have turned on managers at Chelsea. So I don't know what his intention was. I don't know if it was more an apology to Inter Milan, but his comments towards Chelsea were very stupid, criticizing Tuchel, saying that he didn't want to come to, England at the time. He wanted to stay in Italy. That's what I think the wording. I mean, I know the words he used just sucked, but I think part of it was maybe lost in translation in Italian. Maybe that's what I hope. But at the end of the day, if he comes in, we know he's not going anywhere. So, I mean, we pay him to score goals. So if he does that late in the season, if we make a deep Champions League run, if we win the Club World Cup, if we make an FA Cup run, all will be forgotten. Maybe, we make, a late title charge if City drop off. So, I mean, we brought him in to score goals and he hasn't been healthy. He hasn't been available to do that. So his criticism, his whining, I think he's like the main, I think he has main character syndrome, if I'm being honest. I think that's what it comes down to. But frankly, I mean, you've won nothing in your career. Your biggest moment in Chelsea was missing a penalty in the Super Cup 9 years ago against Bayern Munich. I mean, you've done nothing in a Chelsea shirt. So to speak so poorly about the manager that put all that faith in you, to speak poorly about the board that spent 100 million on you, I mean, it's really just slapping Roman Abramovich and Marina and Bruce Buck. I mean, you're just slapping them all in the face, and Petr Cech, everyone that had the faith to bring you back here and to make you kind of that main man, to make you the hero of Chelsea, just to spit in their faces. I just think it's stupid from his from his point of view, because I mean, you're 3 months in. You have every opportunity to earn your chance, to earn your place, to win trophies, because really, there's no other club that's going to give you an opportunity to win the Champions League other than Chelsea. I mean, this is Lukaku's big chance. He's 28. He's in the prime of his career. So it didn't make sense, the comments whatsoever. It was pure stupidity. And, I could look back at it and, I could, take a step back and, say maybe he was trying to say this. Maybe, it was more of an apology to Inter fans. I could look back and kind of distance myself from the person, because at the end of the day, I don't know who Lukaku is as a person. He seems very intellectual, usually, speaks 7, 8 different languages. He scores everywhere he goes. He seems to be an intelligent person, and he's worked very hard for, what he's earned. We've heard stories of him in Belgium. His mother is very poor. They had nothing. So he had to scrap for everything in his life. And to say he hasn't earned his success is unfair, but you have to know your place and you have to understand circumstance. And maybe you're not playing right now, but that just means you have to work for it, because nothing in life comes easy. We both know that. We live in a COVID period where nothing comes easy for anyone. So just the comments were incredibly stupid. It could have damaged his Chelsea career a lot further, if not for having a brilliant manager like Tuchel, who's a phenomenal manager. He's managed Neymar, he's managed Mbappe. So it's not like he's had problems managing superstar, but it seems Lukaku is level-headed enough to realize he's made a mistake. He'll apologize to the players, probably apologize to the fans, and we'll move on and really in Tuchel we trust. That's really how the Chelsea fans view it right now. And thankfully, it seems like Chelsea have found a gem in Tuchel, because for the first time, there's a manager that everyone is standing behind. Everyone believes in him, and for the first time, as a Chelsea fan, we've never seen a team and the fans get behind a manager like we've seen under Tuchel, not even under Lampard. So bottom line, Lukaku, you're an idiot for making those comments, but luckily you have a manager and you have a fan base that is willing to forgive you. That was a rant. I thought you were going to rant about United, but that was kind of like my 5 minutes to get some stuff off my chest. We have 2 more things to talk about. We have the Champions League, and then quickly we'll talk about Lorenzo Insigne, who has been confirmed by Fabrizio Romano to be signing for Toronto FC. Huge implications, but let's quickly talk about the Champions League. There's maybe 4 or 5 teams that could win it this year, and there's a few dark horses, but we know who's in the round of 16. We know the matchups. So Darya, I just want to ask you, how do you see the Champions League going? What teams do you see kind of making the Final Four and making a real push to win it all?
Manchester United, obviously. That's just how it's gonna be. No, I'm just joking. I mean, look, I would love that, but I don't realistically think that's gonna happen. I do think, unfortunately, I do think City is one of those teams right now that's just on a form of its life, and I think Pep is really hungry to get this Champions League win. If I'm being honest with you, I hate to say it, but I do think they're the best team right now.
There's no doubt. Yeah,
they're just so well managed and have so many attacking talent, and I hate it so much. But I do think City is honestly, in my opinion, the favorites. I think, of course, you have the regulars, like you have Bayern Munich. The others I'm not so sure. I mean, England is definitely in the best position it's been in a while in terms of having its teams. I said United as a joke, but as a dark horse, you can definitely, as I said, from the start of the season, I think United's a good cup team. I think they've always been under, even at Ole. So they're one of those teams that can, in one game, spring a masterclass out there. And of course, you got PSG, which are definitely, Neymar, Messi. I mean, Mbappe. I mean, that's all that needs to really be said about them. Personally, though, I do think PSG will. I think if there's a chance for them this year, it will be them and City, to be honest, to make it to the final this year. I don't know how likely it is, but who knows? Who knows, honestly?
Let me just say the teams that have no chance: Sporting, no chance; Villarreal, no chance; Lille. Although I love Jonathan David, I love what they've been doing in France, no chance. French league just isn't good enough. Benfica, no chance. Atletico Madrid, no chance. Um, I want to say Inter Milan have a chance, but the reality is they're not going to do anything against Liverpool. Even if they do anything against Liverpool, they're not going to make it past the quarters. Benfica, no chance. Ajax, the dark horse. I love Ten Hag. I love what they're doing, and they've proven that they can win. I think you can't replicate magic twice. I think Ajax are going to have trouble even if they do beat Benfica to advance past one of the big boys. And then to analyze the big teams, United, I can't see it with their midfield. I mean, imagine they have to play at PSG, at Chelsea, Real Madrid, and you have Fred and McTominay in midfield. I mean, a Kova Conte would outrun them. I mean, Real Madrid have the midfield players, um, Fed Valverde in the midfield. You still have Modric, you still have Kroos, you still have world class, quality in Real Madrid, and they would just pass around those two. Bayern Munich, we know what Bayern Munich can do. I mean, I don't know what they think they're going to do against Joshua Kimmich and company, Lewandowski, Muller, Alfonso. You have Alfonso Davies in there. I can't see. United. I can't see doing anything. Atletico Madrid. I can't see doing anything just because offensively they don't have that juice. Diego, even though Simeone is a great coach for Atletico, I don't think right now they have the personnel to actually win the Champions League. And then regarding PSG, I saw them against City. They're not good enough. And despite how good their front three is, I just don't think they work hard enough to win a Champions League. And I think they'll be cursed the same way, they are every year. I think between City and Bayern, City obviously had their demons, but, with Pep, that could be gone in 1 year. Their Champions League demons. You just don't know with City. You expected them to maybe have a Champions League already, but they keep falling short. And then last year, when you expect them to finally do it after getting to the final, they run into Tuchel's tricky blues, and Conte have the game of his life, as he often does, being N'Golo Conte. But I mean, they couldn't bypass him, and they really didn't create anything of any substance to beat Chelsea on that day. Chelsea, I don't know if they score enough. I mean, their problem for the last year and a half, even under Tuchel, is they have a great defense, but they can't score their chances. They'll create 5-6 chances a game. They just don't convert. So that's the frustration for Chelsea. And, it's hard to repeat anyways. So if they found a way to go back to back, Tuchel deserves a statue basically in every major city in the world, in my opinion. It comes down to, I think, City and Bayern. Real Madrid are a dark horse because I think they've gotten better, and I think in attack they have someone to supplement Benzema and Vinicius, but he's very young. He can be on off some games, and although he is brilliant on his day, the question is, will he be brilliant on his day against a big opposition? Does he have that moment of quality when it matters for Real Madrid? I don't know if they have that depth. So for me, it's between City and Bayern. I think Bayern can win. I think City can win it. If you had to put a gun into my head, I'd say Bayern because I just don't like City as much. And just so if I'm right about Bayern, I can say I was right about Bayern Munich winning the Champions League. So those are the favorites. I have Bayern Munich winning because I think they'd be extremely disappointed the way they went out last year. So for me, Bayern Munich will win the Champions League this year. Do you have a pick? Do you have a?
Oh man. You know
I know you
what?
don't want to say City.
I really don't want to say City, but I think they are a realistic pick for me. I have to be honest with you. And I hate that, but yeah, I say City. I think they're gonna win it this year.
Okay. Briefly, before we wrap up this midseason review, we have to talk about Lorenzo Insigne. As TFC fans, we have to talk about it. We love small Italian men, don't we, in Toronto? First Giovinco and now Insigne. But Insigne has definitely the pedigree, and he has the talent to be even bigger and better than what Giovinco was in Toronto. $11.5 million a year. Is it worth it? Will he bring another cup back to Toronto? An MLS Cup.
I don't know what's with us and Italian players recently. I mean, it's kind of funny, but look, in the grand scheme of things, I'm like looking at every report for Insigne, and obviously we know him from his time in Napoli and what he's been doing in Italy. And look, he's a standout player. There's not going to be a doubt about that. He's a great player who has a great pedigree, and he just won the European Championship recently, and he's got a lot of quality on the ball. He's 31. Look, is he a great addition to this team? Absolutely. I think TFC is kind of in a rebuild stage where they need to kind of get new players and players to like get people back in the stadium because the attendance record recently has not been great. And it's great, it's good to have. But, I think this is very much a trademark move where it's everyone's coming for the player. It's just coming for the player. Does TFC improve as a team? Yes, absolutely it does. But there are some worse there's positions that they need to fix, and this is not going to fix all of them. You can't fix the defense right now. You have an aging midfield, and Michael Bradley signed on again. You have a new coach. Look, there's going to be a lot of transitioning once again this season. I hope people realize that just because Insigne is here does not mean we're going to win the title this season. I don't think it's possible. I think that we are so far from where we want to be at, since we won against Seattle a few years ago. And it feels like so long ago, man. It's crazy. It's
we were there.
We were there watching.
We remember both finals. We remember. Sorry, we remember all three finals. It was back to back.
We were watching. It was crazy, and now we're in a situation where we're probably coming off the worst season ever in TFC's history, which says a lot. There's my point by saying this is there's a lot more to be done. This is a good move in general. It's a weird move on his part. I'm not sure why he's coming to MLS at this age. But good for him. Good for him. Good for TFC. And it's a good step forward. He's 31 years old.
Towards the end of his career, it is a money move because,
definitely
I think the reports where they're paying him maybe $3.5 million. Okay, I'll take an extra $7 million to my contract. If I'm Insigne, I get it. It's not like he's going to win the Italian league. Like maybe he could win something in Italy, but from a money point of view, from a marketing point of view, I think it makes a lot of sense from Insigne. And maybe, people want to argue, look at, people are playing into, 35, 36, but, that's not always, the norm for players. We see some exceptional players that, are able to maintain their body, their fitness. We talked about Ronaldo Cavani being 36, we talked about Thiago Silva being 36 for Chelsea. We saw João Moutinho yesterday be completely fine in the midfield. He held his own. He was running all game. It's not like he's lost a step or two, but his fitness has still, maintained that level. And I think Insigne may have a little bit of drop off in maybe fitness and being able to play at the highest level consistently for Napoli, and that's why he's not playing week in, week out. So I think it's just a new challenge. For him, he'll run the league. It's not going to be hard for him going up against MLS defenders compared to Italian and compared to Champions League defenders. So for him, it'll be light work. He's got up against Van Dijk. That's just in recent memory. So it's going to be a seamless transition for Lorenzo Insigne, and Chelsea get a hell of a player. But it makes sense for him. Maybe he could have waited a year, but I'm guessing Toronto's offering the most money. It makes sense. MLS is a growing league. There is more talent and there is more money and marketing that is going into the MLS over the last 5 years. So, he sees an opportunity where he says, I'll probably be the best player. Maybe I win a trophy, maybe I don't, but I'm going to get paid a lot of money. I don't have to work, incredibly hard. And, the fans will love me. There's definitely a huge Italian, community and a huge Italian following in Toronto. Italy and Portugal are really the two international markets that, dominate some of the towns and cities in Toronto and Ontario. So, from a personal point of view, look, Insigne is going to be loved. He's going to be cherished. Okay, maybe it's cold, but I think he'll be able to, survive on, $11.5 million a year. He'll to buy, really nice parka, buying a little, can of juice or a Montclair jacket. No problem for Insigne. He has the money now. He's towards the end of his career. So people may want to say, well, he could have stayed at the highest level. But, Wayne Rooney could have also, played maybe an extra year or two in England. But sometimes, the time just feels right for the individual. Sometimes the money is calling. And I think for Toronto FC, great business, great deal. And that's going to put fans in the seats, bottom line.
Yeah, Woodbridge is going to be really happy.
Woodbridge, yeah. Yeah. So this really was a move for Woodbridge. Yeah. Daria, thank you so much. I think we've recapped a lot. We both have our frustrations right now as Chelsea and United supporters, but we're hanging on. We're getting through the depression. We're getting through it, in stages, bit by bit. So we'll keep surviving as the year goes along. We'll definitely come back again for a full season when the season finishes. We'll do a season review. But for myself and I'm sure from Darya, we appreciate you guys listening. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you guys at the end of the year.
Bye-bye.